Welcome to Wabi-Sabi Podcast. I am your host, Adam Yasmin. Thanks so much for checking out the show. Whether you're a first-timer or a repeat listener, it really means a lot to explore these conversations. And if you're feeling them, please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast, leave a review on iTunes, or leave some feedback on Instagram at wabi-sabi podcast. This show is listener-supported. So if you're interested in that, please check out patreon.com/wabi-sabi podcast for a number of ways to support the show, starting as little as $1 a month. And I believe starting at $5 a month, there is a gift of artwork that I will personally be sending to each Patreon supporter every year. So check that out, and thanks for the support. Today I had the pleasure of meeting with Joe Hollier of Light, a Brooklyn-based company, developing simple and intentional phones to be used as little as possible. Both Joe and his co-founder, Kai Wei Tang, are both artists and product designers, and they embarked on a journey 5 years ago to begin developing the Lightphone 1, which was a simple phone that made and received calls only, which to me sounds like an antidote to smartphone use today in 2019. Light was born as an alternative to the tech monopolies that are fighting more and more aggressively for our time and attention. Light creates tools that respect you, objects that empower you to be your best self, technology intentionally designed to be used as little as possible, things that serve, not enslave you. That's a blurb from their About Us section on thelightphone.com. I personally am waiting for my Lightphone 2 to arrive in the mail, I believe in the next month, and I'm super excited to share with you, listeners, in the near future what going light is like for me. So in the meantime, here's Joe Hollier. Let's do it a little bit differently, because I actually treat this show as like a free-form conversation, and I don't really do a lot of editing. It is an uncut kind of unedited like sort of. It's a really organic conversation. I mean, usually I will, I'll do like a 2-minute lead in, and I'll maybe speak at length about, every guest that I'm speaking about. I think for me, it was more just about as high or as low level as you'd like to go, really.
Cool. Sounds good. And I'm sure we'll have a great conversation regardless. Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Hollier. I'm one of the co-founders of Light. We've been designing simple cell phones called the Lightphone, designed to be used as little as possible. They're basically phones that really try to respect you as a user and empower you to enjoy your life and be present while still maintaining that peace of mind that you're reachable. God forbid you need to, get a phone call or call someone. So, a time that we're living in now, 2019, we've become so used to our lives through the hyperconnectivity of smartphones. The Lightphone's a way to kind of take back some of that space, while not totally dismissing, the advancements and benefits of technology that we've come to love as well.
Amazing. And this is for the record, this is your second phone that you and your co-founder are developing.
Yeah. So we're just this month in September launching the Lightphone 2, which is our second generation phone. Correct.
And what was the response to the first gen like?
It was really interesting. I think, we saw a lot of trends. For the record, the first Lightphone was really designed as a secondary sort of supplementary phone, kind of like an away message for your smartphone of sorts. So you could step away for a few hours here or there. And I think, we saw users going light. That's what we've kind of called this experience. What we see is the value of the Lightphone. And, there's this initial anxiety when you go light. Kind of find yourself tapping your pockets, maybe a little bit anxious, not quite sure what to do. And I think that was kind of a wake-up call for a lot of our users. I think, we all kind of expected it, but I think it hits you a little harder maybe than you think. None of us like to consider ourselves addicted to our smartphones. And I think it's in this first moment of using the Lightphone that you're actually kind of confronted with perhaps how addicted we might be to some degree. Um, we are, after all, humans and vulnerable. So, there's always this kind of initial friction, but that actually always kind of resolved itself. We like to call it crossing the wall of FOMO, but there's always this point, maybe it's 10 minutes or a half hour into the trip that you kind of start to forget and stop caring about what might be happening on Instagram, or, that email that you forgot to reply to. You kind of just stop thinking about it and get sort of lost in either whatever you're doing or the world around you. Maybe it's, the company of friends or family. So it actually, we saw quite a positive reaction to the experience. But I think something that we saw, some feedback that we had to digest was, because the phone was so incredibly light, it was limited to only phone calls, 9 speed dials. People that were really enjoying it were finding that they wanted to go light even more. But because of, things like not having an alarm clock, or lack of a contact book, people were having trouble finding enough time in their regular lives to go that light. But they said, if only this phone had text messaging, I feel like I could fully ditch my smartphone for good. And, it's always a tricky thing when our whole value proposition is based around doing as little as possible to start adding features to the phone. It really, can become a tricky dance. But I think we really realize that, like, wow, how much more powerful would that be if someone was able to fully ditch their smartphone for, much larger chunks of time? Would that not be a more life-changing, sort of product in one's life, even if it was, a less light phone to some degree?
So you're saying that the Lightphone 2 was it a natural iteration, or was it an iteration on the first gen that came from, a lot of feedback, or requests from existing users?
Yeah, I think it was very much a reaction to feedback. When we started the original iPhone, there wasn't really any idea of trying to make a second generation. And in many ways, I think it's actually kind of like, it is a second iteration of the phone, but it's kind of going after a slightly different proposition, and targeting a user that's maybe really planning to use this more as a primary device. Obviously, a lot of our users will still use it as a kind of complementary device. Um, but, we were expanding and addressing the people that, maybe were already using flip phones. And we learned a lot from those people that weren't Lightphone 1 users, but that really resonated with what our brand was trying to speak to. And, they were so aligned with the light idea, and they didn't need a light phone away from their flip phone. They just needed a better, simple phone. So, it was kind of a combination of factors. And actually, a third kind of thing that we learned was a lot of people were giving the original light phone to children as sort of a first phone for their kids.
Interesting.
And, we didn't really predict that. And so we took a lot of their feedback into consideration with the Lightphone 2 as well, because I think that's, amongst parents especially, a super relevant conversation right now. You want to get your kid a phone because what if, but God forbid, social media, cameras, internet, strangers, it can be kind of scary for a parent, I imagine.
Well, I personally have a 4-year-old daughter, and though connectivity is not something that I'm thinking about in the here and now, it's definitely, it's really around the corner. It's a couple years down the line, I suppose. But yeah, I can only imagine how the complexities in which parents are thinking about, how to keep their kids safe, how to be in the know, and how to, or I guess what sort of a tool or what kind of communicator to choose to, to have with their kid. It's funny. Because personally, I'm about to be a Lightphone 2 user. I'm waiting for my unit to arrive, and the timing of this for me was really fascinating, because I had pre-ordered. I think the Lightphone 1 was sort of like on back order. I'm sure it's a really popular device. And so I pre-ordered, I'd say that another, like a future batch of Lightphone 1. And I'd say within a few weeks of my pre-order, I got the email for the Indiegogo campaign for the Lightphone 2. And there was this gracious kind of a personal email that came from, um, the minds behind Light, offering me, like, so we noticed that you pre-ordered Lightphone 1. We know we sent out this newsletter soon after. We want to give you the option to switch your pre-order for a Lightphone 2. And that's sort of the journey that I've been on. That's kind of how it started for me. So I think the thing that I'm noticing as I've been on this sort of journey as a designer, as a UX designer, by profession, I was really moved personally by the branding and the storytelling that Light was sort of putting out there. I don't even remember how I stumbled onto Light as a product or as a brand, which I'll leave that to sort of magical mystery, in and of itself. But I've in the last few years, I've definitely have been reading up a lot on what I'm kind of just sort of dubbing the resistance. I'm calling it the resistance at this point, just in sort of like a Star Wars layman's terms, where you have a group of informed humans who are, the likes of, Yuval Noah Harari and Tristan Harris of Center for Humane Tech, and Cal Newport, who's authored books like Deep Work and Digital Minimalism. Um, are you aware of these folks, and do you draw any inspiration from from messages like that?
Yeah, completely. Especially Cal Newport. We just read Digital Minimalism, Kaiway and myself. And that book was amazing. And there was even a Lightphone anecdote that I didn't expect in there. So that was a pleasant surprise. But I mean, it's certainly something that we consider a conversation. You know, we're a part of this and maybe on the frontier side of it, but it is a larger conversation, much bigger than one brand or product. And I think for us, some of our early inspirations were like Sherry Turkle. Actually, she had a book called Alone Together, and then another one that came out right after we started Lightphone, Reclaiming Conversation, and it referenced so many studies that were just kind of validation to our own kind of hypotheses that we would be brainstorming about what someone might want in a phone or why we think it needs to be a separate device versus just perhaps a software solution. And I think in general, we started the Lightphone around basically 5 years ago, September 2014, that Kaiway and myself met and started toying around with the idea. And I think, from then till now, 5 years later, the mainstream awareness and kind of realization of some of these problems, whether it's, the security breaches and privacy issues, to if it's, your social life and how it's impacting your, relationships with your friends and family, or if it's, troubling your sleep because you're looking at the blue light too long before you go to sleep. There's kind of so many angles that have become more aware on a large scale level that we really have seen some shift of tide. And I think screen time teacher, for instance, when Apple rolled that out last year, that was kind of a really big validation to some of the other investors or partners that we talked to. I think that was a big turning point. The fact that Apple, the maker of this device, was kind of admitting that, yeah, this is something our users are actually struggling with, not just a kind of niche idea that these two artistically inclined designers are feeling. That really did help us out quite a lot.
Amazing. And I mean, having started Light, as you say, 5 years ago. Um, what can you say about the experience of going light for you?
I mean, I think there's a lot of things to say. Some of the things that are constantly kind of resetting me. I mean, initially going light didn't even involve an actual light phone because we were so early in the process. It was either no phone or maybe a flip phone, different phones we'd been testing along the way. But I think I was a constant reminder every time I went light. Um, just kind of how much I believe in this idea. I think if you're working really long hours all week trying to get something like this off the ground, you can start to question and doubt yourself. And then in those moments that I was able to go light and step away, I was really reminded just how powerful of an experience it was. But I think on the flip side, I was also, when I came back to a smartphone, for instance, like I found myself almost as vulnerable as I ever was. Um, and that was also really hard to kind of reconcile. Like, I think we were hoping that in going light, you'd find some sort of revelation that would translate back into a more healthy balance when you return to the smartphone. I think that was also some feedback we gathered with the Lightphone One in terms of thinking of like maybe this thing really does need to fully replace the smartphone if we can start to get to a place that has enough of these tools that we find ourselves going back to our smartphone for. If we're able to have enough utility, maybe this could be a replacement. I think that was really inspiring to us. But I think there's even like when I do go light, it's not like I crave one particular app, but I have noticed like just on a generalization sense, like my attention span from when I was a younger artist and able to work in a studio for so many hours a day on a painting. Now I'll go light and I'll paint for a few hours, and I just find myself, my attention span is kind of whittled. And I know there's a lot of studies that talk about that, but that was kind of a scary thing that going light kind of showed me. Like, wow, it's not like I'm craving social media, but I'm finding myself wanting to go for a walk or get another coffee or take another shower. Kind of avoiding things and looking for some sort of crutch when my smartphone wasn't there. And if you do it enough, you start to reclaim some of that attention span and ability to focus. But that was kind of a wake up call for me personally.
Yeah, I mean, if I guess from my side of it, between entering the universe or the dimension of parenthood, because it's definitely a very different particular dimension. But entering the dimension of parenthood multiplied by being a freelance designer, I mean, there was just like the two things were at odds. Like being a freelancer at this time in the world or in the US or in Western culture, it's like, to me, I felt, I mean, I can only speak about this subjectively, but to me, it felt like this, it just felt really antithetical to, um, I don't know, I'd say the foundation of parenthood, or like trying to be present for your experience as a parent, but also just your time with your child. And
Is that because you think like that on and off is like a less clear line? Perhaps like it's not like I'm at work, I'm home from work,
there's
freelance
that
full time.
yeah, there's that aspect to it, absolutely, where there's no on and off. I'm a freelancer. I'm always looking for the next uh uh client
Opportunity.
or the
Yeah.
next project, or I'm chasing down clients for to pay invoices, or then there's having my device, my iPhone or whatever, my Android. Personally, I've been an iPhone user for now over a decade, which really blows my mind. And seeing how, um, yeah, again, life as a freelancer, like, is that notification going to be a project inquiry or a payment or a something, or having these tools like ZipRecruiter or whatnot, sort of feeding me um, a daily email of, you should apply for this job or you should apply for this role. It seemed so Well, first of all, like if you kind of step back and objectively look at sort of you marvel at it, like, wow, what an amazing thing we've built, we as humans, right? You can marvel at it for a second. But I also have like a personal, I don't sort of non-dogmatic and kind of spiritual approach to my reality that's sort of steeped in this tea practice that I've had for 10 years. It's something that I share with people. Its lineage is in like Chinese, Taiwanese, tea culture, and the way that I've consistently rooted myself in that kind of reverence and awareness, and embodying myself, or my profession through with the backbone of sort of tea and meditation, has given me as the sort of like chutzpah to keep going, in this field. But I'd say like the most alarming parts of being a freelancer and a parent at the same time is yeah, is that it's that tug of war of attention. And there's no, I know that, I can say this from a place of privilege personally, but I'm not going to choose between, you know, or there's no argument between like giving my child time, quality time and attention, or like sort of frenetically looking for, uh, a project, things like that. So it's it's definitely been a rearranging, like a personal rearranging for myself. So I'm excited to find the way that, the light phone is gonna how it's going to work for me, whether it's going to be my sole device or whether it's going to be an auxiliary device. Regardless, I think it's actually a really funny, kind of almost a silly question to just kind of throw into the mix. I Are there do you feel any kind of stigma with how people are referring to like smartphones and dumb phones? Like, is this
Yeah,
why are we kind of infantilizing, this kind of thing? Like, they're all communicators, right?
totally. I mean, we, I guess, typically get put into the category of dumb phone by the fact that, we're not a smartphone, especially the original light phone. Um, but, it's never really bothered me in any way because, it's kind of funny to think like, yeah, this is the dumb phone, but I'm actually like more present and able to figure out how to get around on my own because I don't have maps and just rely on the smartphone, which allows me to be kind of, you know, the dumb one in the relationship or something like that. But I do
Uh-huh.
think we've been asked, like, what would you call it? Is it a dumb phone, a smartphone? Is there other language for it? And I think, the light phone is funnily positioned in a place that's hard to define on that spectrum of smart to dumb because, we try to keep some very harsh intentional limitations, which would make it seem like a dumb phone and that it doesn't get images or there's no way to browse the internet. You can't just Google that one actor's name in that film that you can't quite remember while you're at the bar with your buddy. But on the other hand, we are trying to embrace things like ride sharing and directions and some of these things that are actually like at the forefront of technological advancements that have seriously benefited or impacted our lives in various ways. So we aren't trying to just make you know a nostalgic attempt to go backwards. It's trying to kind of step forward, but with like a little bit more intentionality. I do want to be able to have hotspot on my phone so that if I'm at the airport for 5 hours on a layover, I can pull out my laptop and actually get something done. Um, but I think that's where the right tool for the job kind of comes into play. It's like I don't really want to be doing email on my smartphone because it's impractical and it kind of stresses me out contextually when I'm seeing those emails. But you know, there is a kind of time and place where maybe pulling out my computer does make sense. So I think we're really trying to bring intentionality into the phone and kind of divide the technology into various tools that are appropriate for me. And I think something that we try to forever remember is that it is kind of niche product, maybe you want to call it, or at least designed for a specific use case, and it's probably not applicable to everyone. But I think when there's over 1 billion smartphone users, and more or less every smartphone seems to be kind of going for the same goal, more or less. Maybe one has 4 cameras, one has 1 camera, megapixels, this or that, or whatever spec variant or OS variant. They kind of feel more or less the same, and I think we just felt like there wasn't an option for someone that maybe wanted some of the modern sophistication of UX design. I think that's something that separates the Lightphone from like traditional dumb phones. Is we're not trying to use the antiquated inbox, outbox, or T9 texting. We want to bring things like group messaging, a QWERTY keyboard, but we don't also want to have access to Instagram and all of these other sort of potential holes that we might find ourselves vulnerable to. So, yeah, smart or dumb. I mean, it's always been a kind of funny question. I tend to refer to it as a simple phone, intentionally simple, but we kind of teeter that line interestingly.
I like that you emphasized intentional, because I feel like personally, intention and sort of hardware or even software, there's again, even those two things are at odds with each other. You have
Sorry, big crowd.
it's okay.
Big space.
I like how for a moment when you hear, like when I hear laughter and joy, I kind of like there's this I can't help but be instilled with laughter and joy for a second.
Oh yeah, that's the
Like
beautiful
right,
contagiousness of.
right. Like there's the human condition, right? Hopefully in a nutshell. Yeah, I know. Again, like I just like how you're talking about intentionality with what we're choosing to do or use every day. You kind of feel like as we progress, as we kind of go year after year. Now we have, what is it, iPhone 11 and Samsung, Galaxy Note 10 or S10 or whatever, all that stuff. It's like more and more these things are doing more and more, or at least they give off the impression that they're doing so much that you are then gifted with this extra time because you have to do less. So that strange parallel between, convenience and, sort of modest increases in capabilities.
Yeah,
It's
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 very
a really
funny.
strange, yeah.
It's funny because I also don't think they like run as parallel as you might imagine, because I think
Yeah.
what sort of happens is like the smartphone tries to say like, here, we'll make your life easier by this new app where you can hire someone to do your chores for you. And then it's like, oh, but now you're bored because you have all this extra time. So we made an app that will help you, you know, entertain yourself for these flashes of time. And it's kind of like, it's just something that we can rely on to so far of an extent that it's like, is it saving us time? Are we wasting time? It just kind of becomes this fully encompassing thing that helps us be productive, but then entertains us because it's now afforded us this extra time to be productive. And I think something that we always like to joke about with the Lightphone is that, every kind of tech company, startup, mostly software apps I'm talking about, but pretty much anything tries to, be this magical solution to some problem, whether it's a legitimate problem or some sort of marketed thing they made up. They want to be your solution. And I think what we always try to say with the Lightphone is, it's not an easy way out. It's just going to actually be quite difficult. You're going to go light and you're going to touch your pockets and realize that you're kind of addicted to your phone, and you're going to feel some sort of withdrawal, and it's going to make you a little bit uncomfortable. And then you're going to start asking yourself perhaps some questions, and it will be simple things, maybe like, what am I doing right now? What am I doing today? But some of the deeper questions might start sinking in too. At least we'd hope, what am I doing with my life? Why am I still here at this place that I curse every day that I go to, or whatever it is that you feel, you're kind of confronted with a series of questions rather than an answer that just magically solves something. So it's like we're actually embracing the friction and not trying to make your life easier, but actually saying, like, you're going to have some minor inconveniences and you're going to have moments where you can't search the name of that thing. Right now, as I've been testing the Lightphone too, it only has calls, text, and alarms. So, I've had to walk home from places where I'm like, oh, shoot, I can't find a yellow car. I don't have Lyft on my phone. All right, walking home. And, there's a friction in that, but it's like I've never regretted it. When I do walk home, I'm like, yeah, that was minorly inconvenient, but at the same time, I had a tremendous walk. So it's not trying to be an excuse, but it's like when you do sort of confront these things that we've convinced ourselves we so desperately need or we rely on. For maps, for instance, I remember a user describing to me he was so nervous to go with the original Lightphone with no maps, even though he lived in the city for years. He was just like, it was such a nice thing to know that he could fall back on. And when he went out for the day and, even had a few moments where he got a little unsure, but he was ultimately able to, say, I think it's this way and commit to it and, get home. He said he felt so empowered. And I think that's something we kind of forget when we just look at for a device to solve everything for us. Is like, there is some empowerment when we can do some of those things. Obviously, technology has afforded us a great deal of luxuries that are amazing, but I think that's where intentionality kind of plays a really important role in deciding which ones make sense for you and not. And obviously, there's no one size fits all answer there. And the Lightphone kind of is just there as an option for those that feel like maybe you're right. What you guys are saying kind of resonates.
Yeah. Again, I mean, for me, I'd say the opportunity or the perceived opportunity of having less of these tools on me so that I may actually interact with people, to me, is exciting. And I may be biased saying that because I'm a parent. There's this there are really unique cultural experiences that I like sort of came head first at, like sort of in the midst of parenthood, where like when you walk around with your kid, suddenly there are like people that come up to you or come up to the child and like start interacting or speaking or commenting or those kinds of things that, like, again, without walking around with my daughter, I wouldn't be experiencing that personally. So there's that aspect to it where like asking someone for directions, maybe they know, like if maybe perhaps we're traveling or something and we're in a city or a town that we don't know. And so that kind of seemingly very human experience of, I'm going to ask a local for directions or a recommendation, hey, do you know of any good food around here? That kind of thing. To me it seems so novel. Like you're almost like I'm going to shape my traveling experience around that. But to eliminate that for yourself, even in your own city, it seems like you may be, not to say like I'm missing out on something that's amazing, but yeah, I guess this just goes back to that sort of mass, like wholesale convenience to not have to know where I'm going because Maps is telling me. I can get to my office and then order food and then a stranger will come bring it to me. Those kinds of things that today we're taking for granted. I can't help but I guess maybe as a UX designer, I can't help but try and empathize with the people on the other end of those quote unquote convenient interactions, like the Postmates delivery person, the Lyft driver, the Amazon delivery, like what are their experiences like? So that's kind of like where I find myself going as I get kind of existential about this
Yeah,
topic.
no, I mean, it's a rational place to go, and it is kind of sadly a forgotten one. I mean, the way I've experienced using products like that, which isn't terribly often, is that they try to kind of make them seem invisible, just a part of the UX, and it's almost about as little interaction as possible. Even if it's taking a car from A to B, it's like don't talk to me. I'm in my Uber
Yeah.
or something.
Which is so funny. Like I felt like even a company like Lyft, which arose naturally as competition to not didn't exist solely to be competition to Uber, but I felt like their first differentiator was we fist bump and smile and say hi and like talk as drivers. And now that seems like complete like history, like ancient history with sort of ride sharing etiquette, however that's updated in the sort of the cultural lexicon.
Yeah, and I would say that like that translates all the way to like going to a bar in 2019, and it's like, you know, I go with my light phone, and it sounds so great to be like, yeah, go to the bar, and you're there, and you're able to meet strangers. But when every other person at the bar is glued to their phone or on a date, maybe the few people that aren't on their phone at every given second have a friend there. It is a kind of weird experience. It's like people have almost become uncomfortable with this like live talking to strangers. I mean that not in like kids talk to strangers way.
Yeah.
It's like the genuine interactions. Like, hey man, I've never been here before. Can you recommend a cool bar? I'm looking for something kind of divey with some old tunes. It's
Yeah.
like Yelp's not really going to be able to give you that. Or at least I've
Yeah.
never found Yelp helpful for the kinds of places that I like. It kind of keeps you in this almost like cookie cutter, probably ad driven ecosystem of establishments. So,
Yeah, exactly.
and then I think it comes back to that word you said, like missing out. It's like, well, if you live by the Yelp or the TripAdvisor, I'm probably listing like the most antiquated ones. I'm sure there's better new um, platforms for finding places to go. It's like you're almost missing out on the chance encounter of like the place you could have never even imagined going to because you got a little lost and the guy at the gas station told you, oh, if you go 10 more miles that way and hang a left, and uh, you could surprise yourself versus this idea of like premeditated and like I'm gonna get that one Instagram picture at the top of Yosemite and whatever it is, the one photo that I wanted so bad versus like being, there, present, and surprised, or going along with the chance of it all.
Yeah. I wonder actually, because you mentioned, addiction, a couple of times in this conversation. I wonder, having gone light and, sort of and creating this whole ambiance, that you've created, or I don't know, create. Yeah, I guess we'll just call create the ambiance and, develop the brand and everything. Has Have you viewed addiction, or have you been able to view addiction in a different light? Um, and again, like to talk about technological addiction versus opioid addiction, or I mean, there's definitely like different continents to reference here, but I guess I'm just referencing like technology, namely.
Yeah, I'd say for a very long time, and even still, I tried to actually avoid referring it to it as addiction. I know people have always kind of said like, "Oh, this is the cure to your smartphone addiction," because I always felt like it was kind of pointing a finger. You know, like you're an addict, you're bad because you use a smartphone, which is never really the point of view that we want to give because you know Kai and I are also smartphone users at one point and just as vulnerable as everyone else and susceptible to all of the same you know, exploitations that these apps can take advantage of. But I think over time, the addiction word actually has kind of rung to be truer. And I think one thing that's really struck me personally was like I never felt like a smartphone addict at all. And I think people would ask me like, "Did you create the Lightphone because you were so addicted?" And I always got really defensive, like I'm not addicted to my phone. I never needed a Lightphone.
Yeah.
But I think in going light and then seeing how I react when I got back to my smartphone, or like that initial anxiety when I did go light, after talking about this for years, still kind of feeling that friction, made me realize that, like, you know, wow, addiction is probably the right word. And there's actually no shame in admitting to yourself that you might be an addict. And I think really all that that means is that you're probably less aware than you'd like to realize of the control that it has over you. I think, things like opening and closing Instagram 4 times in a row. Like, I've had countless people tell me stories like that, or watching people on the train. You open it, it's like you didn't even check anything. You closed it, and then you opened it again. And it's that kind of unconscious
It's the same thing as like
behavior,
twiddling your thumb. It's like
biting
so
your
minute.
fingernails.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, and I think that's where like the addiction word feels right. And I think what I've also learned is like none of us want to admit we're addicts. I think the smartphone does a great job of giving us the illusion of all sorts of productivity or connectivity that feel, like there is something productive happening. Well, I posted this photo and I got all these likes, and that was me. I was also freelance, and a lot of my friends are freelance artists as well. So there is some degree of like, well, I'm using social media to promote myself and get jobs, and it's actually, I'm working. It's not like I'm addicted. But it's a very fine line, I think. And if you really look closely at yourself, um, you might realize, well, actually, maybe I'm a little bit less in control than I think. And I think, that step is, oh, it's okay. And, that awareness is the first step. And fortunately, unlike probably other addictions that are very deep rooted in chemistry, like an opioid addiction or something like that, I think the smartphone addiction is one that is probably easier to kick than maybe any other. Um,
Sure.
I think Sherry Turkle's book was rather optimistic in our ability to reclaim conversation, as she called it. Uh, so addiction is a tricky word because it has such a negative connotation, and you don't want to make people feel like an addict because really, you got a smartphone so that you could FaceTime your grandma. There's all these amazing
Yeah.
features that are great on it, and it's hard to parse it. Where something like an opioid drug, it's very obviously just kind of negative drug through and through. I'm not sure there's many positives that anyone's ever felt. So that's where the addiction word is trickier with smartphones, technology in general.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to be said about almost destigmatizing just the word addiction. I mean, you could look at, caffeine and sugar, right next to, opioids. Obviously, the symptoms or the side effects are way different, but it's great to have that conversation or that topic, at least within the filter of, talking about addiction and technology, be um, at the forefront right now, or at least like a lot more mainstream of a conversation.
And
Um,
I think it's something that like isn't inherent to technology's progression. I think it feels like a choice that was made um, at some point in time. The ad-based free revenue model really became the one that took over,
yeah,
and that really pushed the thing out of
yeah,
balance. Obviously,
exactly.
people have been addicted to all sorts of things for all of time. Substances or games or whatever it is. We can find ourselves addicted to walking. It's like you could probably find yourself addicted to anything, to some
Yeah,
degree. And I think technology isn't inherently bad, but I do think the kind of business model and businesses that have really taken the forefront of our time and attention uh, are really kind of exploiting us in this crazy way. So it's interesting to imagine a different direction for technology. And I think that's where Light gets excited by saying, like, let's step back and maybe someone goes light and they invent the next Facebook that actually is a genuine way to connect people, and maybe it does cost money, but it's not this kind of like crazy conglomerate thing that it's become. um, I don't know.
yeah, I know, and it's funny to even mention Facebook, I guess, at this point in time, just because it seems like such a runaway, unregulated, like medusa of like insanity. I personally like finally suspended my account and have successfully not used um Facebook for almost 2 months now. Uh, Thank you. But that being said, like I probably all of my what's the word here? All of the impulses I have to maybe use Facebook have probably channeled just towards Instagram. So, and again, like I probably use Instagram in the same way that you mentioned, 3 minutes ago. With it furthers my my freelance career. It furthers my podcast, getting awareness for those kinds of things. But I'm well aware of how I abuse it, or how I'm uh, looking towards it or reaching towards it for various levels of validation. But I wonder if, um, like, to dream of a new model of the way we relate to technology. I mean, this may sound kind of hokey, but like, I always felt like the way I viewed something like Star Trek seemed like such a balanced and benevolent way of like utilizing technology. Everybody has a personal communicator, and then there's a mostly like a voice interface, computer that you may be utilizing. I wonder if, um, like the GUI, right? The graphical user interface is really what needs to kind of go go just become a fossil already, so we can actually try and begin to try and communicate better. I wonder if that may be a certain route.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something interesting in that. I think at a high level, it seems like a very quick way to kind of take us away from this feed driven, infinite image video that's just so mesmerizing to us. Seems to sort of break that. And at a high level, it seems like, a straight utility, like hi Siri or whatever, this futuristic voice is. Can you help me get from A to B? And then, you're not even having to take your eyes off the real world. You're there. But, I would fear that even if the interface changed to a completely audio one from visual, you know, as it stands, there's still plenty of room for exploitation, whether that's
Sure.
purely on a privacy level, like, yeah, we're getting you from A to B, but we're tracking your location your whole life.
Yeah.
Or, it's like the radio where you have to now listen to ads in between
Yeah.
your actions or something. Obviously, there's probably a way that it wouldn't have to fall victim to that, but one could kind of imagine how it could probably face some of the same, uh, you know, temptations, at least that we've seen with, the visual oriented feeds. But I do think, at least, taking your eyes off the device is a huge first step. And as a Lightphone, people have definitely suggested, like, why don't you embrace this voice command kind of thing? And a lot of our hesitation has been around just, the technological hurdle to do something like that well. Um, I think we try to remain relatively realistic to what we're capable of as a super small team, and probably not capable of, at least not yet. But I do think it does feel like something that could be aligned for a Lightphone feature. You know, Especially because our screen is so incredibly small that it could make some interactions much easier.
Speaking of small screen, I actually, one of the reasons why I was so immediately drawn to um, Lightphone 2, basically when I committed to pre-ordering it, was because um, having used iPhones for 11 years now, it was this sort of iPhone 4, iPhone 5 form factor that it was my favorite. And so, like, to think back on like something that's that small and capable, like not big and overwhelming, that was like one of the reasons why I was like, oh, this instantly makes sense to me. Like why I would from a perceived form factor reason, that was like, oh, I absolutely want that.
Yeah, and you're not alone in that. A lot of people have said, especially guys, I think, because they don't typically carry around a purse or like to go around with just their phone in their pockets, um, have expressed just like frustrations with how large the smartphones have gotten. I mean, on one hand, I can understand why they're making bigger phones. If everyone's using this to pretty much watch videos and see images, you would want to see it bigger. But I still think I always felt like it's too small for me to like actually do all of my email and kind of work things. Like I'd much rather have my
Yeah.
QWERTY keyboard, um, and all of my files and everything. Kind of like my computer is my favorite tool, kind of. Um, so I always kind of felt like, well, it's still a subpar experience to my computer, but now it's made my phone this enormous, like, I mean, I never had quite, I stopped at the 5. That was the last iPhone form factor I had as well. Or SE, sorry.
Yeah.
Same thing, I think.
Yep.
But, for our phone, it's like the screen is quite small, but I think it speaks to that intentionality. Like the phone is never trying to be an entertainment device. And, something that we get asked is like, will the phone ever have an ability to read books? Which philosophically doesn't seem like something we would be against as a light phone tool, perhaps. But I think we kind of refer to the fact that the screen is so small, and we think it'd be a subpar experience to read a book on what is essentially a credit card sized device.
Yeah, and also like in the name in the defense of books, like I couldn't like I couldn't imagine reading like 21 lessons for the 21st century like on my tablet. I want to get a copy of the book. And like sure enough, I was traveling from like London back to LA with my family the other week. And like at Heathrow Airport, there was like buy a copy of 21 lessons for, like on sale for like £5. I was like, this is the perfect thing for like, yeah, traveling for, 13 hours. But to embrace books, I know that people would argue they're cumbersome and maybe expensive over time, but if God forbid, like these devices don't work tomorrow for whatever, solar flare reason, to go all kind of conspiracy theory for a second, we at least have books and have each other
Oh, I mean,
to
I
tell
went to
stories.
school for graphic design, and many of my either mentors or peers, some of my peers at least, are still very much book designers full time. And it was a really interesting thing to see the industry change while I was in college. The iPad got announced essentially and came out.
Yeah.
And that was super weird. And, there's so many minor aspects that you take into consideration when you're a book designer, the idea of like setting the margins right and fixing these various things and typesetting it and trying to keep the widows at bay and, really paying attention to every aspect of the book. And then when it's on an iPad and it fits different on every screen size, and it just kind of like, takes away that aspect of the design, which to me was like, everything. Uh, I still find myself using real books and loving it. I love sharing them. I love when someone comes over and we're having a deep conversation about something, and I can say, "Oh my God, this book I read last month. Like, here you go," and to be able to hand it, like it's such a nice object for me. And I kind of feel the same way about cameras, and I think that's what the Lightphone tries to get at. It's like in some ways it seems so counterproductive to separate these things into different devices when we probably could do everything on one iPhone. But what are you sacrificing in trying to have that convenience of one little device? It's like, well, I lose my viewfinder on my camera. I lose the big focus ring that I love. I lose the turning of the pages, the holding of the pages, the highlighting of the word. You know, all these little things, which kind of make me sound like some perhaps hipster romantic or something. But I think there's
No, man, no,
genuine
not at
value
all.
to
Yeah.
it.
This is, you know what? So the next conversation, I want to talk about nothing but nuance. I want to just like dwell. I want to dwell in nuance for like an hour or more. Um, man, like, yeah. I actually have to. It's funny. I have to go pick up my daughter from preschool in just a few minutes. But I want to take that moment to put a bookmark, use a proverbial bookmark in this conversation for the next time when hopefully the next part of our conversation is after I've got the phone and started using it, and then we can sort of dwell within the world of nuance, and also just to say the understated, like the next time I'm in Brooklyn, I would love to pour host tea ceremony for the staff. I think that'd be such a great opportunity to again just sort of dwell in an immersive experience that's so subtle.
Yeah, let us know, definitely.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I can't wait for my phone to arrive and to let you know what the experience is like for me. And I really appreciate the time and the spontaneity and the sort of the moment shared today in this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for obviously supporting our project and helping us share our word. We're crazy excited to get everyone the phone. I would be lying if I wasn't really nervous to see just kind of how people respond. Obviously, there's a million design things that people can criticize, various features or decisions we made along the way, but I think I ultimately know that our product is one that's relatively difficult and requires you to embrace some degree of friction or inconvenience in the name of perhaps more special nuanced moments. But it will be interesting to see how you and all of our other 10 plus thousand backers enjoy the phone or hate
Well, in the name of wabi-sabi and everything that's beautifully imperfect, yeah, man, I can't wait
it.
I can't wait to just experience that friction for myself and to learn something about myself in that process. And I hope more people get hip to that quicker or sooner than later, because we need more of that in the world. I believe that's what I think.
Well said. Well said. Well, good luck.
Again, so thank
And we'll
you,
talk soon.
and we'll talk soon. Thanks so much.
Cheers.
Bye. Thanks for sticking around. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I know I did. I'll definitely be following up with Joe after I receive my Lightphone, and we'll be sharing with him what going light meant for me as a freelancer and a parent. So you can check out the Lightphone at thelightphone.com. You can follow them on Instagram. You could check out their really insightful blog on Medium. And again, thank you for checking out the show. This was episode number 18. If you'd like to support the show, please subscribe, leave a review in iTunes, follow the show on Instagram at wabi-sabi podcast. You can check in with me and leave some personal feedback. And if you'd like to support the show, check out patreon.com/wabi-sabi podcast. Thanks again.